This meeting is being recorded, and this is not an automated voice. This is a human voice. I think we should get started, Pernian. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Parnian Tajbash. I'm a program manager with the Ontario Bioscience Innovation Organization. Just a quick overview, OBIO is pretty much a later stage accelerator supporting the bioscience ecosystem within Ontario and Canada wide. Scispot is one of our member companies, and when they talked about kind of setting up a webinar to talk to biotech companies about AI readiness and what are the things that they need to consider, we thought it would be a great opportunity to kind of put that out to our network as well. Hence why I am here moderating today. So our agenda for the day is, after a brief intro, there's going to be talk about what the journey towards a self-driving lab is going to be like, talking about what architecture is needed for lab maturity, best data management practices, some examples around AI acceleration, and kind of talking about the concept about knowing your AI scores. So like Satya mentioned previously, this is meant to be an engaging session, so please do feel free to drop any questions at any point in the chat. I'll be watching there and I can flag it for the team to answer. You don't have to leave them to the end. And yeah, so with that, we can get going.
Brilliant. Thank you for the background information, Pernian. And Guru will get us started, who's co-founder and CEO of Scispot. So Guru, over to you.
Yeah, today we want to talk about how will the future of lab or lab of the future will look like. So we all know it will be AI driven because we started seeing every lab is thinking about how they can embed AI. We also know these labs will be self-driving, more autonomous in nature. And the reason we thought we want to talk about how companies can think about preparing their lab for the future or become more AI ready or automate their workflows more, because the goal here is to help these companies, labs, so they can bring life-saving drugs or life-augmenting products, scientific products to market faster. So we want to make sure every friction can be removed or reduced as much as possible, but also improve the efficiency. So hopefully it doesn't take a decade to bring a life-saving drug to market. It takes few months, that's our hope, to bring new drugs to market. So to draw the comparison, what I would like to, before we delve into the future, I would like to reflect the journey of self-driving cars. We all know it all started when we invented a wheel, and it took centuries to come to the point where right now I'm in San Francisco and I can literally request a taxi, which is autonomous in nature. But it took centuries to make that improvements. So humans don't have to drive. It doesn't even make sense for humans to drive a car, because I know many people love driving cars, and I'm pretty sure many people loved riding their animal-driven cars too. But it's time to move on. It's time to automate things that can be automated. But it was not easy for this transition. Most of the transition happened in the last 2 centuries to reach to the point where we are. Why I'm sharing this? Because there's quite a bit similarity between lab of yesterday, lab of today, and lab of the future when you compare it with how whole transportation or ground transportation has evolved. Now, let's talk about the evolution of labs. Right? So in last century, any lab that started, it was almost completely wet lab based, right? It was not really, there was no integration of digitization. There was no integration of any digital tool. It was completely wet lab based. But if you compare that with companies that started in the last 2 decades, most of them have some integration of digitalization. And especially in the last decade, what we have seen is like 10 years ago when you started biotech company, 90% of the workflows were wet lab based. About 10% was more analytics focused and were very basic digitalization like Word doc, ELN. But now when we see new biotech companies starting or coming to Scispot platform, on day one, they start as a tech company They are primarily a tech company, but then there's wet lab component, and we will keep seeing a wet lab diminish further, and it will be like a dry lab will overtake most of the wet lab techniques. And eventually, in the next decade or so, we will see most labs will operate as cloud labs. I'm not saying we will get rid of wet lab completely, but we will only use wet lab work to provide fresh supply of data, the lack of better words. But in silico model will hopefully work hand in hand with wet lab techniques, so we can reduce number of animal experiments. We can reduce the need of a significant number of in vitro experiments. And it's already happening. It's no more sci-fi. And the promised land here is how can we move the labs towards completely self-driving labs? So it will have a robotics controlled wet lab, but most of that will be in silico based, in silico modeling to predict the efficacy of the drug or safety of the drug, in silico ways to design protein molecules, small molecules. It's already happening. Many of Scispot customers already have heavy focus on in silico, but our hope is labs will become more and more autonomous in nature. Just like for ground transportation, we had to invent the wheel, we had to build engine, we had to apply AI and cloud computing. There's a journey for bio company to become AI ready, and that's what we want to focus on today. But I like to compare this with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because before you think about self-actualization, you have to think about basic human needs. Similarly, bio companies, before they think about operating as an AI powerhouse, they have to think about basic needs. What is it? It is basic digitalization. It's basic standardization of data model. That's step number one. Once that is taken care of, you want to start thinking about intra-lab connectivity and inter-lab connectivity. We see labs working together, whether through outsourcing model or collaboration model, but there's no integration. So you cannot become or operate as an AI company if there is no integration within your tools, if your hardware, software are not connected, or hardware and software of your partners are not connected selectively with your internal processes. So that's step number two. At Scispot, we are enabling that as well. Step number three is once your tools are interoperable, you want to make sure all the data is aggregated, harmonized. Data come in different forms and shape from different machines, from different data producers, consumers. So you want to make sure it can be harmonized. It can be, we use the term in this industry, fairification. You want to make sure data is findable, accessible, interoperable, repeatable. And you want to make sure that happens. Otherwise, data is not really readable by machine or usable for your desired objective. Once you have that, this is a must before you even talk about AI infrastructure. You want to make sure your data is structured such a way so it can be used, it's accessible to AI. It's accessible for your model to even leverage. So you want to make sure your data is vectorized. You want to make sure your data is stored in a more 3D format, like graph database, not like basic taxonomy. So Satya will double click on AI infrastructure, like what are the recommended AI design patterns, vectorization, and more. Once all of that is done, then the hope here is labs will operate with their own intelligence, with selective feedback loop from humans and wet lab data, but they should be able to scale and hopefully be able to bring cures to all major diseases that we need desperately to the market faster than ever before. Satya, over to you.
Brilliant. Any questions, any thoughts so far? If not, we will keep going. As Parnian mentioned, drop in a question in the chat if you have any, or feel free to come on stage and speak up as well.
I guess before you get into, AI architecture for lab maturity, what do you think are some common mistakes that companies make while even thinking through these things?
I think what we see is companies buy, like if you speak with any pharma R&D informatics person, they have like 10 different subscription of ELN, like electronic lab notebook. They don't talk to each other. Data is locked by a vendor. Unfortunately, most vendors in our industry apply more vendor lock-in philosophy, more inspired from Oracle and all these big companies we hear. So locking their data without thinking about how they can get data in and out and connected is the biggest mistake, because you end up buying more tools, arguably for improving the efficiency of one specific workflow. But that data it's like sitting in an island. You cannot even access it. That's the biggest challenge. Plus, now new companies have a luxury to think about setting up their data infrastructure properly. And we will share some tips, like how you can think about setting up your AI infrastructure, your data infrastructure. Satya, would you add anything else?
No, that's perfect. John, are you saying something? It'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, actually, I have your discussion about self-driving labs and decreasing the amount of wet lab work. I certainly agree in some spaces that makes a lot of sense, particularly in, for example, cancer research, which is where the vast majority of startups are and where the vast majority of information exists, because we've really gone after that for the last 14 years, 15 years in industry. So there are a lot of data available, right? Now, that's a percentage, actually a relatively small percentage of overall drug and disease treatment space. And in all of the other spaces, there's very little information upon which to build. So when I think about the power of AI, I think the power of AI there is to actually ask better questions and learn faster than before. And it's a little bit different than when we think of a big, vast body of information like we have in oncology. So the question that I have is, when I think about how AI would go about asking questions and designing experiments for better answers and faster, discovery, is it going to want to actually do more wet lab experiments? I mean, would an AI say, hey, I want to ask all these questions so that I can get to a conclusion faster, so I need more wet lab experimentation? So if you ask AI if it needs to do more or less wet lab, what would that say?
I think that's a very good question. And we have to understand, like, at what part of research you can incorporate AI and what is the use case, right? AI assistance can be reactive in nature. AI assistance can be proactive in nature. When it is proactive and it can find patterns that increases the likelihood of failure, it can help you fail fast. As a result, less number of experiments. Or rather than failing in late stage of R&D, or rather than failing when you hit the clinic, if you can fail early on by leveraging your historical data and all the data you can feed into your model and detect those patterns sooner rather than later, so you can fail fast. That's one thing. But more reactive AI assistance is mainly talk to AI smartly. And what we are learning is it's a totally new skills that we humans have to acquire, right? Even when I speak with colleague, I think about, do I need to ask this differently? It's prompt engineering, right? So now you apply that prompt engineering to machines to get the right answers. And so while you're running experiment, you ask questions. So you design your experiment, hopefully reduce number of errors down the road.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts, John? I think you made a very good point. Do you see like this evolution helping us simulate some of these experiments eventually? Or like, I would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Well, if we think about really the promise of generative AI, the promise is really, think better than we do and just do better than we do, right? Especially when you can answer questions with data, which of course in science you can. So if there's some kind of, I won't say sentience, but a generative AI engine out there that says, well, I have this hard problem to solve, right? I need to solve the disease ALS, right? How am I going to go about that? Well, I've got all these targets and all these different mechanisms and all these different, so wouldn't it naturally say, okay, I need to try 3 CRISPR treatments and I need to try and target these 14 proteins, and then I need to try this and that, and maybe it can prioritize, but ultimately, to me, it feels like it would want to generate more wet lab experiments. Now, the total duration of conducting experiments, the cycles may not be 4 years or 5 years like it is today. It might be able to ask the questions and get the right answers and narrow to a good clinical candidate in 2 years, right? But the net volume of experimentation in the wet lab, I believe, would need to be much higher than we have the capacity to do today.
That's a good perspective, especially if AI, hopefully, if it democratize running these experiments. So you don't need PhDs to be able to conduct these experiments. If you can empower people to run more experiments, you're right. And other point of view is you allow people to run these tests in silico, right? So I know our models are not very advanced to be able to replace animal models that required by FDA for safety and efficacy. But I think it's a matter of time. We need enough data, well-structured, harmonized, and maybe some initiative to encourage sharing pre-competitive data so we can create more in silico replica of that. But I agree with you, if you democratize that, which AI has the potential to democratize things, then it will encourage people to more citizen scientists, basically, to be able to run more sophisticated experiments. In that way, it will increase number of experiments. But hope is we have all data well captured, well structured, so we have in silico replica to perform those experiments.
100% agree on that point.
Brilliant. On that note, we'll delve into the hows and some of the mental models that we've seen as some of our customers are building AI architecture, or how we're thinking about integrating legacy LLMs into the AI architecture, and how to get more out of your R&D data. So before we talk about lab maturity, a bit of background. My background is all data engineering and data science. I used to work for Formula One. If I have Formula One fans in the audience, I think Pernier is a Formula One fan, so I have to mention that. But if you're a Max Verstappen supporter, then I don't support Max. I support Lewis Hamilton, only for the F1 fans here. So I've seen data engineering from the olden days of 2010 of what the BI business intelligence looked like, all the way to the hype of LLMs and how people are thinking to architect the application. So I used to work in travel tech and hotels.com and Expedia, where the margins are really low compared to bio and big pharma. So the data architecture tends to be a little bit more mature. So just want to share what I've learned from the mentors, advisors from different industries when it comes to mental models of AI. So yeah, let's delve right into it. So the first example I have is a AI router design pattern. So this has been shared a lot over the internet by a lot of folks, but I do want to double click on this a little bit, where if you're a small biotech lab and you're thinking of building AI architecture, you don't have to leverage large language model for everything, And the idea is that, let's say if a technician queries a system for the last recorded pH level of a specific cell culture, this routine query is usually directed towards a small model. So you can get an immediate response without taxing, the compute, the larger, more complex system. You don't have to go through an LLM, a large language model in that case. But then there are examples where if you have a router, like a classifier that categorizes the input and then decide whether to go towards more of a standard query or a complex query, right? So complex query LLM does make sense, where an example could be a scientist asking for, let's say, comparison analysis of gene expression levels across different experimental conditions that could be stored in your electronic lab notebook, or could be stored in your lab information management system or your data architecture. And this complex query is routed to a large model that is capable of, let's say, handling multifaceted data analysis, just to make sure you get more accurate results. So this is like a very simple kind of mental model of how to think about routers and how to think about small language models when it comes to like, architecting your own AI applications. And then like another example I have is more like AI training design pattern. So I'm showing like 4 mental models. These are not mutually exclusive. You can do mix and match as you're kind of thinking about your AI applications for your biotech lab. But this one is like kind of highlight continuous training and evaluation of your AI models, because one of the things we keep hearing is biology has a lot of variables, and standard foundation models don't really fit the bill or answer some of the questions that these scientists are looking for, or at least are not that accurate yet, at this stage and point in time. So in that case, like adversarial models can suggest billions of tests to stress the model, and you can train to have like to have strengths different to the target model. So just like you have, let's say, researchers continually collecting vast amount of genomic data, for instance. In this case, an AI model trained to identify, let's say, potential gene therapy target can be continuously updated with new data. And this could be synthetic data too, because in the AI world, there's a lot of like synthetic data now that can be generated quite easily. And then adversarial models then can challenge these updates. So with those challenges, you can like ensure that the AI prediction that you get remains robust against evolving viral factors used in gene therapy. So that's just one example. But because biology has a lot of variables, this kind of pattern makes sense as you're thinking about architecting this in-house. Okay, great. The third mental model that I want to highlight is the security design pattern. Again, these are not mutually exclusive. I'm just sharing like simple mental models here, and this one is like a thinking of how firewall can protect the model and the infrastructure it uses, for obvious reasons. So you have we still have a minimal understanding of how humans going to evolve these models for biotech applications. But let's say like you're a lab technician, and you're accessing patient genetic data through your electronic lab notebook. So you got to make sure that the query passes through a proxy that anonymizes that data to protect patient confidentiality. And then the firewall can screen for any unauthorized data request before allowing access to like a centralized model, if you will, and this could also help you satisfy SOC 2, HIPAA, or CFR Part 11 controls. And the other thing you can think of here is if you collaborate a lot with, let's say, CROs, or if you get data landing from instruments or third-party data, you can also think of like protecting your in-house applications that way as well. So you don't have to expose the model directly, essentially. And then one last mental model that I have here is more from a developer perspective. So as a computational or a developer person, you have a machine secured with, let's say, endpoint detection and response. And then let's say you're developing on personalized medicine, a new drug response data is frequently integrated in the system as a dry lab. So you have like CI/CD, which is nothing but continuous integration and deployment for the developers who might be in the audience. And then that could allow for rapid updates to the predictive models, whether those are hosted in your data infrastructure or you're leveraging some lab information management system. And that can undergo rigorous testing to ensure that prediction about drug efficacy remains accurate across various demographics. So the idea is that from a developer standpoint, you could automate the AI development and evaluation by thinking of this mental model, if you will. Okay, and then lastly, without going too technical, I also want to highlight a very standard AI architecture that I've seen with a lot of biotech labs who are thinking of implementing this on top of their data infrastructure, or using this in parallel with their electronic lab notebook or lab information management system. So to walk you through this very simple architecture, I'm sure some of you are already familiar with it, but for the folks who are not, let's say I'm a researcher who conducts experiment testing a new drug compound's effect on cancer cells. So I'll have certain documents, results, images, data logs that I can upload to like a document ingestion service. So like the bottom right is the document ingestion service, and then that data can be stored in Blob if you're using Azure, or S3 if you're using AWS. And once that data is stored, you can start creating embeddings, because you do want to like enable vector search on top of that data. So you can also leverage foundation models or your small language models as well. So you can use any kind of vector store in this architecture, but this is like a very standard way of like first creating the embeddings and then leveraging the query which is processed using your foundation models to understand the semantic or ontologies that you might have in the biotech context. And then you can like have an app that consolidates all of this information on the front end. And you can think of the mental models that I just shared, how would those mental models fit into this architecture? Okay, so that was just like a high-level overview of different mental models and like a very simple architecture that I've seen working. But I'm going to pause here before we get into the next section.
There was a question in the chat before you started the section about naming a specific AI algorithm for this purpose. I'm assuming it was with respect to the cancer research example that was being discussed. And to the person that asked the question, just curious, did the examples that Satya went through, does that kind of suffice and answer the question, or did you have a further question about that? Again, feel free to unmute yourself and, ask away.
Hi. Yes, I wanted to know that if there are specific AI models that they are already on the market and we can use them for this purpose, for analyzing our data. Or and another question that I have is that because AI works with big data, and usually in the lab we don't have that much data unless we are a very big and old lab. So how applicable is this area in small labs or new labs, let's say?
Yeah, great question. So let me start with this one, and then I can come back to the other question. Is it Ale, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly? Sorry, just want to make sure I'm addressing you correctly.
Yes, Elahe.
Elahe, okay, awesome. So
Thank you.
Even like startups or SMEs are starting to think about architecting the application correctly, even if the volume of data is not correct, not large enough. So why is that? Because I think from a data integrity standpoint, it's good to have a good data model, right? So for example, even for a smaller lab, you have certain experiment metadata. You might have to stitch that data with instruments, or you might have to like compare the protocol deviations across multiple experiments, and then analyze what samples were used in those different experiments, or what inventory was used. So there's definitely benefits of thinking of structuring your data correctly for data integrity from the beginning, even if the volume of data hasn't increased that much. But I think Guru, do you want to add something to it?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the use case. For simple use cases like talking to your historical data, that's pretty straightforward. You don't need much data, but you can say, hey, compare the results of last 5 experiment for this objective, right? So it's already very valuable, and AI works magically well. So our customers talk to their data all the time, and it's pretty impressive to see how impactful it is to help them make better decision. But you're right, you need big data to create more advanced predictions and recommendation. So for that, you need big data. So it depends on the use case. For simple use cases like analyze or compare things, or because when you power your data with LLMs or even with AI, you have to vectorize it, you have to do embeddings, you have to label and classify that data to contextualize it further. And AI can do that too for you before you can talk to your data. So for these simple use cases, it's very impactful, even with small data for startups and small labs.
Yeah, I would love to know, Elahi, if you have specific use case in mind, like the type of lab or type of experiments.
Thank you very much. I'm more interested in discovery and maybe at this point, I'm able to use other people's data to for that purpose. But as a general, I want you to know that how deeply I can leverage that. Thank you.
Makes sense. And yeah, in terms of algorithm, it depends on the use case as well. There are a lot of open source model. NVIDIA also have like BioNeMo, and there's quite a few models supported there. And Hugging Face also has some, but yeah, it's hard for me to recommend a specific algorithm. But if you share your use case, happy to like double click on it later on as well. Okay, so the next topic is the best practices in data management. So this is just, sorry, before I go ahead, Parnin, was there anything else you wanted to raise? Okay, awesome. So the one thing that I wanted to highlight is this is just like last 3.5 years of like brain dump of like what I've heard across, let's say, thousands of customers or potential customers or friends, partners, or people we've worked with. What questions do they ask, right? So try to summarize this in one slide. I couldn't add all the questions or all the things here, but still added like 3 pillars that I would love to run through. So let's say if you're setting up your biotech data infrastructure, or your lab is now generating large volume of data, and you're want to stitch it together, or you're thinking of like building one source of truth as part of your lab information management system, LIM systems. What are the things that you should ask yourself, or what are the things that you should think of to scope your architecture to build a future lab, or make a more mature data model? So 3 things that I've kind of thought of. One is know your data model. So essentially what that means is, have you defined the lineage of your samples and experiment, and how it is evolving for your specific use case? And then the other question that I keep hearing is like, do I optimize my data model for scalability or governance? Meaning, do I make it absolutely rigid? So let's say if I have protein peptides runs, how stringent do I make the metadata and the data model of that my peptides are connected to proteins, my runs are connected, of how I'm running those experiments, versus like how flexible do I make it? Meaning, how much flexibility do I give wet lab and computational folks to evolve that model, Or if you're going through a funnel of like data, starting from like larger amount of data to like funneling it down to more accurate data, what should be the trade-off between flexibility and really rigid models? So those are the questions that can help you decide how to kind of build your data model and how to evolve as well. So it also depends on the maturity and where you are in that journey. Then the second thing that is kind of very important that I keep hearing is you adopt ELN and LIMS that has an API that can be used by a computational folks to stitch your wet lab and dry lab workflows. Because one thing I've noticed is there's like orthogonal tooling that computational folks use versus what wet lab folks might be using. So there's always an opportunity to bridge that gap. And a lot of like old school ELN and LIMS don't have a very good API. So stressing on that is very important. And that's why, like, from Scispot perspective, we dedicate a lot of our roadmap on like keep updating our APIs for everything that we build that is available through GUI, through graphical user interface in the system. And then lastly, like a question that I get a lot. Sorry, go ahead. Was there a question? No. Okay. Lastly was like clearly defining the source of truth, because there is like a lot of tool fatigue in the market. So hearing folks from like SynBio event, or before that Bio event in the Boston area, a lot of folks have been saying, hey, I have tool fatigue. There's so many tools, I want to build one source of truth. So building one source of truth could be a good strategy, but then even then, a lot of companies do end up having multiple tools, right? It's hard to avoid that. So the question that I often get is, it's okay that if I don't have a one source of truth, but how do I like make sure that I'm synchronizing the data or pushing the data or replacing the existing data as I talk between different systems? Meaning, let's say you're landing your data from ELN and LIMS system and then using another tool to land data from your instruments. Now, what is recommended is you should document what is your source of truth for instrument data, for example. What is your source of truth for plasmid designs? And what should be your source of truth for, let's say, analysis? And I've seen folks like landing on Databricks or Snowflake as like their data lake, right? And then their plasmid designs, their experiment data could come from ELN LIMS system. Their data infrastructure could be Scispot as a staging lakehouse in the middle. But it depends, like, what is your source of truth? And that's why, like, one of the philosophy that Scispot has is we don't want you to get locked into Scispot. Our goal is to like use Scispot as a staging lakehouse, so you can define different sources of truth depending on the type of data and the use case that you might have. So yeah, those are the three pillars of making sure you have a good data governance in place before thinking of like all the AI mental models and before thinking of transitioning into a more mature lab when it comes to data.
There was a question in the chat from Artur asking what type of skills are essential for a scientist who wants to work in an AI-driven lab?
Yeah, great question. So when I started Scispot, I noticed like there used to be two distinct personas 3-4 years ago. One was wet lab and dry lab, and they didn't talk to each other. There was like if you do a Venn diagram, that Venn diagram had like a very small percentage of people. But now recently I'm seeing those kind of folks are merging, like people understand wet lab and they also understand, let's say, how to use AI or how to write Python scripts or, what does ETL, extraction, transformation, loading means, and how do I leverage that for my analysis? So it's almost like a unicorn skill set where knowing wet lab and also knowing computational aspects can be useful. But again, it depends on the use case. When you say AI-driven laboratory, you could be focused on a very specific use case. So I really like what NVIDIA CEO mentioned the other day. He's like, going forward, we don't need more specialists. We need more generalists, meaning every industry would be augmented with AI. So having that generalist point of view would be more helpful than just specializing in one thing.
I agree. I think all these skills will hopefully become irrelevant so humans can focus more on things they are good at, right? More thinking, making decisions, doing more creative work. So writing Python scripts, I mean, we are already enabling that. You can simply chat and write transformers, Python script to do QC in your instrument data, or talk to your data. But some understanding, strong basics in every field helps. So at least you can talk to or get AI assistance smartly, right? People who already have strong basics, they can go really deep with a little bit of foundation. So foundational knowledge in biology, chemistry, basic computer science will help a lot.
There was another question from the chat asking, do data models exist such that either scalability or governance has to be the focus for optimization? Is it not possible to optimize both with existing models?
100%. I don't think they are mutually exclusive. That's why, to me, those are trade-offs, like levers. For instance, how much do you want to optimize for scalability versus how much do you want to optimize for like really strict governance, less flexibility? So I've seen like GXP compliant labs optimize more for governance, more for like rigidity, versus like R&D stages where there's a lot of tinkering, so they focus more on flexibility. But both are not mutually exclusive, right? You can have a little bit of both. It's just trade-offs that you get as you implement controls for both of them, Okay, great. If no more questions, I think we can keep going. So the next topic is the AI acceleration example. Guru, do you want to take this one?
Sure. For all the AI use cases, I think we haven't even touched the surface. Currently, labs are incorporating AI, basically picking low-hanging fruits. We know AI, which is inorganic intelligence, go really well with biology or chemistry data, because biology is like 4 billion years of evolutionary forces behind that. So it is generating a lot of data, many things we don't know, which is organic intelligence. But AI is more inorganic intelligence, which is really, it has great complementary skills. It can analyze big data. Biology can produce big data, right? So to get those answers, labs are incorporating that. And we see that across the R&D cycle or product cycle. For example, a drug company, R&D company, even before they design their molecule, they can use in silico approaches to shortlist some of the drug candidates, get some answers on drug-like properties, and also they want to make sure it's really feasible to synthesize those molecules in real world. So for that, many of our customers are already doing that. Hypothesis validation, so all the assumptions you have based on your in silico experiment data, you still need wet lab to validate those assumptions. And once you have, once you are ready for preclinical work, or once all the binding assay work is done, you have some shortlisted candidate, and you're ready for preclinical work, then many labs in our community are using AI to complement their experiments. So they know how to fail fast, and how can they run experiment with less number of samples, how they can run experiment with less number of animal models, because they have some safety efficacy data using their in silico experiments. And we are seeing this even in the clinical stage. We don't currently support clinical stage, but in clinical stage, based on our market research, there are many companies helping with optimizing your clinical trial experiments, and also to optimize the dosage. What is that ideal dose to test the efficacy of the drug, or to make sure drug is safe enough? Manufacturing, we do support biomanufacturing labs. So we do see the role of AI in process optimization. And there's one YC company, I don't remember the name right now. They are basically generating thousands of experiments throughout the year, so they can train their model. Basically OpenAI for chemistry, that's how they position it. And their goal is that labs synthesizing drug molecule will be able to run less number of experiments to produce those drugs, or less number of processes to produce those drugs. So they don't have to fail, because they have already failed in their wet lab environment. They train their model. So one lab is doing all the work. So in the future, 1,000 labs can benefit from that AI model. So they learn less number of experiments, or less number of manufacturing cycles. So the main impact of AI I see is that we will have models which is already trained with past failures of other labs. So when you start a bio company, you don't have to go through the painful process of doing tinkering, figuring things out. Hopefully, we will figure it out once, and then make it available to other labs. Now this slide shows like a perfect marriage between in silico world and the wet lab world. So how we see the experiment design happening, or will be happening in the near future, is all the experiment you run will be, labs will run it complementary to in silico experiments, and there will be feedback loop in place. So if you are shortlisting a drug candidate or molecule, not candidate, for high throughput screening, it will go to wet lab, basically shortlisted number of molecules. Then based on your result, it will have the feedback loop to your in silico world, and it will make the model even better to give you better recommendations. So every experiment will hopefully have a feedback loop in place between their wet lab and computational lab. So that's the current focus, and more labs are incorporating AI. So it's pretty exciting times for us, but I still think AI is at the baby stage, infancy stage. It is not it's not a teenager yet. And we will be surprised in the next decade or to the whole biotech world will look very different. So it's very exciting times to empower labs that are ready for AI. Last but not the least, if you would like to know your AI score of your lab, it can be in very early stage, that's okay. We are sharing this link. Satya, do you have this link handy so we can share this in chat?
Sure.
Or someone on our team can share it. So fill this type form. I think it will take you only a few minutes. And we can share your AI score with some recommendation. You don't have to answer anything confidential. Just go through this whole 2-minute, 3-minute form. Give us as much details you can share comfortably, because we have been collaborating with hundreds of labs regularly. So we have quite a bit insight to calculate your AI score. And feel free to leverage us. Happy to give some recommendation and response as a follow-up.
So do you guys maybe want to spend a few minutes talking about some of the programs that you guys have available to companies, and maybe just as an overview, how do you help companies and customers prepare these data models even to start with?
Sure. So we provide data infrastructure to biotech companies, and you can use the entire data infrastructure to become AI ready, meaning we have connectors for all the data sources, data consumer. We can get data in and out of different systems, automate data extraction from instruments, transformation, do the QC check, make sure there's no out of scope. So detect all the discrepancy in real time. And then you can push that data to your single source of truth. Companies also use us as modern ELN and LIMS system with data science focus, because it's very basically it talks with other systems. So it's more data science friendly, unlike other big companies we see in the market. Some companies only use us as integrator. They don't need to do any much transformation. They just bring the data from one place, do a little bit cleanup using our scripts, and then push the data to their systems. It can be their internal ELN or LIMS. There are different ways companies use us. It can be ELN or LIMS or entire data infrastructure sitting between your single source of truth, like Snowflake or Databricks. Third use case is more one-off integrations to operate as a connected lab and AI-ready lab. And we have back end of a product also has graph database. We vectorize your data if you like us to vectorize it. And your data belongs to you. And then we expose that with API endpoints. So all the data you create or proprietary ontologies you create, you can train your LLMs.
Someone in the chat was asking, are there any case studies or white papers, maybe on the website, or that you could share?
Happy to do that. We will see if we can find your email address from the registrant list. We can share some more details with you. Is there anything specific you would like to know? Like if you share something, we can find more relevant content. You can also share generic stuff, so it's all good. Alrighty, so we are drug discovery, genetic medicine. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Lee.
Brilliant. I think we're right on time, and the attendance was great. We had 60 folks at the peak, if I include LinkedIn Live as well. So thank you for all the folks who joined in. And we will share the live event, and we'll also share the case studies and white papers with some of the folks who asked for it. And then if there are any more, I think there were a few comments on LinkedIn Live as well. Guru, do you want to share? Let me share the LinkedIn Live comment as well. That was because we've been monitoring Zoom and not LinkedIn Live. So one of the things that somebody mentioned was AI could be very useful at sifting through existing data from past experiments to see if something was missed. So totally agree with that comment. So even if you have if you don't have huge volumes of data, AI can be used for some of these use cases. So I really like that comment.
100%, because it doesn't make sense wet lab scientists doing hypothesis work, right? How many papers we can read? I know scientists we like to read a lot, but I think we should let machines do that job, right? To sift through thousands of papers and make sense out of it and guide us to do more creative work.
And thank you for the compliment for the hoodie. It's a Scispot merch. But
Alrighty. Any final questions? If not, we can wrap up. And please go to that link we shared, submit that. We will share your score, recommendation, and some of the white papers. Or maybe hoodie.
And maybe hoodie. Any final
Yeah.
comments from you, Parnian, before we close up?
No, thank you everyone for the questions, and great discussion, and thank you, Scispot, for putting this on and kind of educating the folks of what is to come in the future. Awesome.
Brilliant. Thank you, folks.
Thank
Cheers.
you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Have a good day.